Hello, welcome to Third Grade Bible, Part C. This is part of an extended series of videos that I call the Bible K through 12. It is not for young people or children, but really for adults, especially those who don't have a clue what the Bible is all about. And I entitled it K through 12 with the idea that as we progress, we will get a little more intense, a little deeper intellectually, and so forth as we learn about the scriptures. In this video, we are continuing the story line of the Hebrew nation. We have completed the story of David, the greatest of the Hebrew kings, and now we want to continue with the story of his son Solomon. Solomon was the son of David's wife Bathsheba. You may recall that she and he had an illicit affair that was all initiated by David. And so, there's that taint with Bathsheba. On the other hand, she was, in a sense, an innocent bystander in the situation. Solomon was not the result of that affair. The child that was born from that situation died, but Solomon was born later. There were a number of wives who were married to David and a number of sons. But David had named Solomon as the son who would inherit the throne. That didn't come without opposition. There was a son by the name of Adonijah who attempted to take over, but he was thwarted, and the central leadership, the high priest and Nathan the prophet and others supported Solomon, and so he did become king. He became king of the southern portion, Judah, and also by covenant with the northern portion of the Hebrew nation that is sometimes referred to as Israel. And so Solomon took over where his father left off. He consolidated the military gains that David had already won, so that there was a very powerful kingdom, almost like an empire, from what's called the Wadi of Egypt, which is sort of about halfway toward Egypt from the southern part of Israel, all the way up to the Euphrates River. A very large portion of land that was dominated by the Hebrew nation. Solomon had as his greatest achievement the building of the temple. The Israelites had worshipped at the tabernacle during the wilderness era, and then that sort of was a complex series of situations, we might say, after they got into the promised land. And the place of worship, the central place of worship, kind of floated around a bit. It finally ended up in the Jerusalem area. But then Solomon built a building, a magnificent building, and it was a place where the Ark of the Covenant containing the Ten Commandments was placed. It was a place where an altar was out front for worship through animal sacrifice, and it was the place of worship. The people didn't go inside, as if you have watched my video of the temple, you know that they stayed outside and watched and saw priests go inside and sort of in their imagination participated vicariously as to what was going on inside the temple. But this temple then was sort of a center place, a centerpiece for the whole nation. And in addition to that, Solomon built a magnificent palace. He had all sorts of other building projects. He is described in detail the magnificence of his wealth. He just was loaded with gold, and he was a very successful king. There was a flaw in Solomon, and that was that he took on wives. David, of course, had multiple wives, but that was just the beginning. Solomon had many wives and concubines. And that, of course, was a cause of sin in itself. But not only were these wives, a temptation for Solomon, they were foreign wives for the most part. Many of them were daughters of kings and other potentates in the region, and in many cases these marriages were arranged marriages so that there could be a treaty or a covenant between the nations, and there would be peace with all the surrounding nations. And of course, it also gave these foreign entities some leverage on Solomon. But there was a further complication. These wives brought their gods with them. Of course, the pagan worship, the idolatry that had surrounded Israel for centuries, was always a worship of some sort of statue or idol. In many cases, one that could be carried around or one that could be built on site. And so these women worshipped their gods right in the holy city of Jerusalem. And as they did so, this is a terrible thing. Solomon went with them and participated in their worship. And some of these gods were especially evil. There was one god, Moloch, that was worshipped by child sacrifice in some cases. There's no record that Solomon participated in child sacrifice, but much later there would be a king who would participate in that way. In addition, this whole thing was just undermining the very reason for this nation to exist. God had told Moses, and through Moses, the people, that they were to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Now, a kingdom of priests to God, to Yahweh, to the real God, the God who had delivered them out of Egypt, the God who had defended them against their enemies, and the God that had prospered them, and the God who really gave Solomon all that wealth. That God was now competing with a bunch of foreign gods. Solomon continued to worship God. He went to the temple. He watched the priests sacrifice. He participated in the worship of the true God. But at the same time, he was messing around, so to speak, with a whole bunch of foreign gods. And as he did that, of course, he was the role model for the nation. And so it was that the whole nation began to be corrupted by what some people call syncretism, which is a fancy word for meaning a mixture of religions. So that it wasn't a matter that they rejected Yahweh worship. It was a matter that they tried to put it together with all these other worship of all these other gods. And so it was the beginning, really, of a corruption that would continue for hundreds of years. So this was sort of the final outcome of Solomon's reign. And as he did this, he began to see some weaknesses, some military weaknesses, some failings. He began to see that the grand, tremendous power and glory of the reign of Solomon was starting to fray at the edges. And that would continue into the next generation. Well, Solomon lived out his days and died. He was about 60. He reigned for 40 years. And then came his son, Rehoboam. And Rehoboam had to make a covenant with the northern tribes. It wasn't just automatic that he would be king of the entire nation. And so he consulted with them, and they said, well, we would like to make a covenant with you. And so what do you require of us? And so Rehoboam said, we'll come back in 3 days. And he consulted with some wise old heads who said, look here, Solomon was a great king, but he also was selfish. He was one who required hard labor. He did draft a lot of young men into the army. He taxed very heavily. And so you need to lighten up. You need to give these elders of the northern tribes some assurances that you will not be as harsh as Solomon has been. He also consulted with some young friends of his and basically said, okay, this is what the old guys say. What do you say? And they said, look here, you got to come down on these people. You can't let them begin to have a little bit of wiggle room, or they'll just take over. You've got to be as harsh or harsher than your father. So he listened to the young heads. They had been his buddies. And so he came before the elders of Israel, and this is what he said. My father got that. But my little finger will be as big as his belly, and it's going to be weighing down on you. He whipped you with whips, and I will sting you with scorpions. It's going to be me and me only, and you folks are going to knuckle under if you're going to be my subjects. Well, the elders said, I tell you what, house of David, you go and find your own place and you take care of yourself. We're going home. We're not going to put up with this. And so they did. They left. And there was a young man, well, a contemporary of Rehoboam by the name of Jeroboam. And Jeroboam actually had had a prophecy said to him by a prophet that he would take over 10 tribes of the house of Israel. That actually was the northern part that was called Israel. And so they heard that Jeroboam was back in town, and so they called Jeroboam and said, you be our king. And he said, okay. So Jeroboam set up some palaces and some places in the north and took over. But he began to think about it. He said, okay, the temple is down south in Jerusalem. And these people are going to want to go down there and worship. And when they do, it's going to be a temptation, a break with their loyalty to me and to the north. And so he set up 2 places of worship, one in the southern portion and one in the northern portion of the land of Israel, of the 10 northern tribes. And at these places of worship, he built some idols. He built some golden calves. And he said to the people, here are the gods that delivered you out of Egypt. Oh my goodness. It goes right back. If you are familiar with the stories of the Exodus and of Sinai, you may recall, and I really did not talk about this story when we were in that portion of the scripture, but Aaron, who was Moses' brother, actually made a golden calf. Some people say that really it was more a metal calf that had been molded and so forth. But whatever the case, it probably had some gold in it anyway. And he said to the people, here are the gods that have delivered you out of Egypt. Oh my. So the whole thing, as Yogi Berra said, or supposed to have said, it's deja vu all over again. And so it was that um, Jeroboam in the north, just from the very get-go, began a totally pagan system of worship. Now, it's evident that a great many people didn't follow along with this, and they continued to go to the temple to worship. They continued to honor Yahweh, but many people went along with what Jeroboam was advocating. And so we have a very sorry situation in the next generation after Solomon. Rehoboam did not totally abandon the temple and Yahweh worship, but nevertheless he continued his father's practices of worshiping foreign gods. And it's mentioned that there were even places where there were male prostitutes that were involved in the worship of these foreign gods. This was a practice that was found among a number of different pagan religions, in which basically the sexual act was understood to be an act of worship. It connected the god to fertility, the god to children, to crops growing well, and so forth. And so this practice now was right there in the midst of what had once been God's holy land. And we find that as the generations continue, this kind of syncretism, of mixture of the worship of the true God with foreign gods and Canaanite deities and all of these wicked practices continued. The whole thing just sort of waxed and waned. You had times when you would have real revival, and there were times when there would be strong witness to the Lord, but other times where things just were frittering away. You know, you can get kind of pessimistic sometimes, because you see these kinds of things even today, that we as Christians who have received the grace of God at times have a tough time continuing in faithful worship and service to the Lord. It reminds us of just how much we need God. Now, there is one thing that I need to mention, and I made a promise earlier that I would begin to put scriptures associated with the videos. And I've not gotten a whole lot of that done, but I have gotten a start on it. And so I have made a list, and you can find those online. And if you've got a pencil and paper, you might just jot this down. The website is called Last Days Workshop. It's all together, one word, then .com. course, www can be at the beginning. Let me go over that again. It's last, L-A-S-T, days, D-A-Y-S, workshop, WORKSHOP.com. And the last day's workshop all is put together. This is a website that I maintained for quite a number of years, still have it. It's, in a way, it's kind of been put to the side. If you're curious, you can follow back and read a whole bunch of stuff. I maintained this since 2012, and so there's a whole lot of times that I have put it up online. And in fact, I printed all that out, and it filled 4 loose leaf notebooks. So it's a bunch of stuff that's just totally free of charge. So anyway, lastdaysworkshop.com is where you can find scriptures, and I will try to continue to add to those as the days go on. Thank you for your faithfulness and worship and watching these videos. I don't know where I was going with worship, but for watching these videos, thank you for a few of you have made some comments, and not necessarily online, but you have let me know that you liked it. And so it is a blessing to me to put this out. Tell a friend. We need more viewers. So thank you again.